A very warm welcome to what's actually the last in our series of 4 business resilience and recovery seminars, which we're presenting as part of the University of Brighton's Responsible Futures activities. My name is Shona Campbell. I'm the Associate Director of Enterprise. My team's role is to connect businesses with the university to work together on mutually beneficial projects of many sorts. All that remains for me to do is to introduce today's presenter, Dr. Dave Francis. Dave is a Principal Research Fellow in Centrum, which is the Centre for Change, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Management in the University of Brighton's Business School, where his research focuses on organisational agility and functional innovation. I'm just about to hand over to Dave, so you will hear my voice again as I'm going to be relaying the questions to Dave. But for now, Dave, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Shona, and I'm very pleased to be presenting this seminar. It's on organisational agility. I need to emphasise the word organisation, because if you search for agility on the website, a lot of it is to do with dog shows. Dogs apparently jump over hoops and through them, and they climb ramps and go through tunnels and all this kind of thing. And this is the dog agility. But we're going to look at organizational agility this afternoon. And my interest in organizational agility really developed when I was working many years ago in Harrods. I looked after executive training there, and it occurred to me to be really surprising that some departments, some work groups actually were extremely capable of being flexible and adaptive, and others not so. And what were the reasons why some departments within the same store were dynamic, flexible, adaptive, and others were much more traditional, if you like, stuck in routines and so on? And we began to explore at that time as a group of managers what it took to actually be a dynamic department. And since then, I've done various other things. I worked as a strategy consultant for some years, and then I joined Centrum to undertake a 2-year research project on organizational agility. And in that research project, what we did was to study in depth how different companies could actually apply the principles of agility to their own environments, to, as it were, put their arms around agility, to learn how to manage it, how to integrate it with the other sorts of things they had to do, and to make it work for them, to exploit the capacity of agility for advantage. And today I'm going to take you through one of the key dimensions of agility management, which, as far as we know, is original. It's to do with a typology of agility, as this actually helps to bring it under management. So I'm going to switch now to my presentation, walk you through it, and I'm looking forward to questions and comments about how it's actually all going to work for you. Because one of the things that we have found in our own work is that organizations are not the same. Let me just try and get this presentation to work for you. Aha, there we go. Now, I call it exploiting agility for advantage because one of the things that we as researchers and as managers have unfortunately discovered is that agility is not always advantageous for companies, and actually not for not-for-profit organizations either. Why? Well, there are three main reasons. Firstly, agility can add cost faster than value. And if this happens, then you can be disadvantaged. So agility is not a capability equally required for all organizations. And there are disadvantages associated with it. It's not that, on balance, it's not a necessary and at this particular time, an essential dimension of how organizations and managements need to function. Indeed, the majority of organizations in a post-COVID era will need to go through a phase in which agility is even higher up the management agenda. But as I said, it is a double-edged sword in a way. In order to be flexible and adaptive, you need to acquire additional capabilities, and this can be disadvantaged. The second reason is that there are different types of agility, and if you adopt the wrong type of agility for what you want to do, then you can be mal-organized for that function. And the third reason is that when you're agile, your organization changes more quickly and adaptively. And what that means is that people need different skills, leaders need different skills, and the organization needs to have greater coherence because people need to work together in flexible and adaptive ways. So what we're looking for is not to be more agile as a principle. We need to exploit agility contextually for advantage, for getting the very best from this particular form of organizing. And just to take examples, there are many, many right now, but if we take COVID-19, we see that Sainsburys, amongst other retailers, have in fact been extremely highly adaptive. They've demonstrated agility, some more than others, but just looking at Sainsburys, for example, they've done many things: limited numbers in the stores, the queuing systems, the way that checkouts are being managed, safety screens, helping elderly and NHS customers, and so on. And there are multiple initiatives that they've taken, some of which actually are thinking very broadly. One thing that I discovered as I was preparing for this presentation is that they're actually selling in many of the stores the big issue, with the money going to vendors and to the big issue itself. So what Sainsbury's was able to do was to be agile. They discovered that there was a new situation that has some new opportunities, and perhaps more importantly, new threats. And what was needed was the ability to cope quickly, but prudently and sensibly with the opportunities and threats, the landscape, the changing landscape of opportunities and threats that they then faced. And it's this that is the principal deliverable or function of organizational agility. It is, if you like, a kind of capacity to adjust to the environment, but not just to respond, but to be proactive in positioning the organization into a new context, into a new situation. And the way that I describe it is that an agile organization is capable of 4 specific functional activities. And these are, firstly, that it responds effectively to changes in the wider world. And what this means is sensing what's going on, predicting what might go on, predicting, if you like, possible futures, and then working out how to position in the changing landscape, which is, if you like, the context in which the environment works. I used the word prudently optimistic a few minutes ago, and what we found is that agile organizations need to see the potential for opportunities, and sometimes this means stitching together different forms of opportunity and getting, if you like, packages which actually assist you to move forward. And it's not just opportunism in relation to what you sell or how you position yourself strategically. It's opportunism in relation to how you operate internally to create value. And we find that the quality of decision making regarding the finding of opportunities and the selection of those that are right for you, because not all opportunities are equally right for everybody, is a mission critical capability. The third area is in mitigating, minimizing threats in order to become resilient. Resiliency is something which we haven't really taken as a high priority within organizations in the main from a strategic point of view over the last few decades, but it's coming to the fore as being an essential component of organization development. And the fourth component of agility is to strengthen the capability, the probability that your organization will be capable of thriving in a different future. Now, this is a definition. Obviously, we can go into further depth, and it's work that I've been doing over the last year or so. But I think that when we look at this and we see these as components which require management, it actually takes us further forward. So, is agility important? Well, a relatively recent McKinsey Global Survey discovered that agility, organizational agility, nothing to do with dogs, organizational agility is a top 3 priority for the kinds of clients that McKinsey have, which are the top organizations in the world. So agility is a generally required capability across organizations generally around the world. But as I said earlier, it's not actually straightforward as to how much agility you need, where you need it, and achieving the value added from it greater than the costs incurred in delivering it. But one of the things that we have discovered is that agility is not just a big picture strategic issue. And I remember visiting a food factory some years ago, and this particular factory had large ovens underneath of which insects tended to really enjoy a wonderful life down there with the heat and the food and all this kind of thing. And I met Marilyn, who was the maintenance manager. It was in the US, this particular food factory. And she was absolutely passionate. I remember her saying to me, you know, I really want to get these roaches. She was passionate about hygiene, and she would sit there having her coffee break, reading magazines, searching for ideas, looking for different techniques, trying things out. She actually got people to undertake experiments. She led problem-solving teams, looked at new technologies, kept detailed records of what the success of different methods and the combination and all this kind of thing. And she had an agile mindset. Now, we find this at all levels of organizations, from top managers down to the shop floor to professionals and so on. And in fact, in agile organizations, agility is a dimension of proactivity, which is very important. And we're looking for people to acquire this kind of agency. So there are 7 truths which my research has identified, which I will just run through with you. Not all organizations need to be equally agile. Why is this important? Because each organization needs to determine where agility is likely to add value faster than cost, and actually develop an ambition and a methodology for how to achieve this. Agility needs to be woven into the other sorts of things that organizations need to do, like, for example, making sure the cash flow is working, investment, diligence, building brands, and all this kind of thing. So it needs to be integrated. As I just said, leading an agile organization requires a distinctive set of competences and capabilities. And these are somewhat different from some of those which we've emphasized in recent years. So there's an unlearning and relearning task for us. As I said earlier and will emphasize later, adopting the wrong type of agility can be dysfunctional. And interestingly, the subunits of an organization need to actually operate distinctively in operationalizing agility, as one size does not fit all. Within my own university, for example, my research group, Centrim, needs a different kind of agility than other parts of the university. And so each individual component or section needs to actually consider how they need to be agile to fit in to the whole, but to do what they need within their own area of responsibility. Becoming what I call requisitely agile, and I'll define that at the end, actually is a learning journey. It's not something that you kind of switch on. It's a set of specialized capabilities that need to be worked at. And one of the things that we have found, I learned this in my work in Harrods all those years ago, that agility can be lost as well as gained. So it needs to be renewed and upgraded. So before I get into describing the types of agility, if there are any questions, I'd be pleased to try to answer them.
Hi, Dave. I think people are just warming up. We're just starting to get questions coming through now. So to start off, when building a team, how would you go about identifying the traits that are needed to be agile?
Well, so far as team building is concerned, you're absolutely right, Shona and the questioner. Building teams is a mission critical activity, but these teams actually are often much more flexible and adaptive. The word sometimes used is they're adhocracies, meaning that they're created for a specific function and a specific time. And since 2002, there's been intensive work undertaken by practitioners and researchers into what it takes to form a highly effective and functional team, agile team, and the word used to describe these teams is Scrum. It comes from rugby. And anyone who's interested in team working in agile organizations, they need to understand what are the methods developed to run effective Scrum teams. I'm not going to go into that in detail now. It's a subject for a whole new, whole additional workshop, but there are lots of fabulous YouTube videos on Scrum. There's some great websites. It is, in my opinion, the most efficient and effective set of integrated methodologies for achieving that end. Back to you, Shona.
Thank you. Yes, because we have a little rash of questions there that have now flowed in. So, how do you change the "but we've always done it this way" culture in a team or in an organization?
Well, organizations or some organizations are set up on that kind of basis. I mean, we still, for example, often emphasize job descriptions. We have still in many organizations annual reviews, setting objectives for the next year, reviewing against these and so on. And what these do is these institutionalize the construct that a job is a specific set of tasks which need to be delivered to a standard. Whereas in an agile organization, those parts of the organization that need to be agile, and as I mentioned earlier, it won't be everywhere. These cannot use those kinds of frameworks and methodologies. And if I go back to the Scrum teams, which I mentioned a few minutes ago, what they do is they have sometimes weekly, sometimes even daily reviews to improve, and they reset the agenda for the future. So the answer to the question briefly, Shona, is that it's not kind of abandoning structure, but it's recreating structures so that people reset what needs to be done and how things need to be done and how people work together almost on a real-time basis. And this is learned experientially, and you work up to it. As I said earlier, it's not a switch. It is a way of working, building in agenda setting on a team basis frequently to realign the tasks which need to be carried out. Next question.
Thank you. So we've got two more questions, and I almost wonder whether I might give you both of them because I think that you might be inclined to tie the answers together. So the first is, how can you measure agility? And the second is there a recommended method or approach for determining when being agile isn't going to be cost effective, so when the costs outweigh the value?
Well, so far as measuring agility is concerned, we have identified a number of criteria which determine and give you an opportunity to assess whether or not your organization has what I describe as systemic agility. In other words, whether the preconditions exist for the organization to be agile. It will need another webinar for me to describe these to you, but I will provide a short narrative on this, which perhaps can go round. The 20 components, each of which have indicators associated with it, are all important. So it's the answer to the question simply is it's not simple. It's relatively complex to do. But agility is a capability to do things which otherwise you couldn't do. So it doesn't provide an absolute standard of how you can assess it or measure it, because there's a capability rather than the goal. If, for example, you used Seven Sigma quality management, you know that if you are not getting more than 99% of the products or services which you produce to a certain standard, then you're not achieving the target. But agility is not like that. Agility is a dynamic capability. So what needs to happen is that organizations and subunits of organizations need to set what I call an agility ambition. They need to envision what their organization is capable of doing, either for internal or external customers, and they need to define it in their own terms and develop their own success criteria. So there are methods for developing agility ambitions and for getting them sufficiently precise, but there is not an absolute indicator of whether you're performing as is necessary to be comparatively or competitively successful.
Okay, great. So the crowd have really warmed up, so they sort of keep coming up. There's a couple that I think I might hold over to the end, but I think there's one which would be useful to bring forward now. So how does one ensure that agility and flexibility is held by the appropriate party and doesn't become a disadvantage? For example, the employer versus the employee, worker or self-employed individual. So thinking about not using agility to compromise workers' rights, such as in flexibility and in the instability of 0 hours contracts.
You know, these are great questions, and I've been working on this for a number of years, and I'm really pleased that people are interested in this. I'm going to give a brief answer to the question, and I'm going to point the questioner to an area which maybe is unexpected. Now, it's perhaps unusual to mention it, but the people who have taken the greatest care and attention to actually answer this particular question are the military. Ever since the breakdown of the Soviet Union, in the military, especially in NATO, there's been a realization that military forces need to be a lot more agile and to be able to work together. They call it interoperability, to work together effectively. And the questioner is right to understand that by making everything a lot more flexible, you can have a mess. And this can be one of the dysfunctions of agility. Now, NATO set up a task force to explore how to answer this very question, how organizations can be appropriately managed to be effectively flexible. And in my opinion, they got further than anyone else. They actually undertook experiments. They tried different modalities of how to be agile, and they gained data about how to manage flexibility. And one of the key insights was the need for clarity about what they call decision rights, which is how and who has the responsibility to take certain forms of decisions in certain situations. Now, I'm not going to go into depth there because Otherwise, it won't be a 1 hour seminar, it will be 2 hours. But if you go onto the NATO websites, you will find that there are free access to the reports on how to configure agility in ways in which flexibility does not mean disintegration. And I would recommend that people follow that, because as I said right at the beginning of the answer to this question, the military contribution to understand agility has many transferable elements for those of us in other forms of organization. Okay. Can't hear you, Shona.
Sorry, I was on mute. So we've got a couple of other questions, but I think what we're going to do is we'll move on, let you finish the rest of your presentation, and I'll incorporate the final few questions in your next section. If you could just make sure that we have good time, because obviously we are getting many questions, which is a great thing.
Yes. So Shona, if I can just ask you, if I need to speed up, just to intervene and tell me, because I'm enthusiastic about this stuff. I can carry on.
Sure, will do.
Okay, right. Now, we tend to think of organizational agility as being a kind of unitary thing, but what my recent research has been looking into is, are there different types of agility? And if so, are these types of agility useful in some situations rather than others? And I've identified 8 types of agility. I'll just run through them briefly now and then take you to another level of detail, because I think that this actually helps to bring agility under management. It's one thing to have an ambition, we need to be a lot more intelligently adaptive to the situation and act quickly and get things right and be bold. But how do you actually manage that is really the question that we've been addressing. And I think structuring types of agility actually provides a very important dimension. You can get agility by the boss telling people what to do. You can get agility in certain forms of organization by routinizing it. As I said, I'll come back to these in more depth. You can get agility by setting up projects. Project management is one of the major forms of actually managing agility in organizations. Increasingly, we're seeing machines, machine intelligence, robotics, and other forms of technical capabilities enhancing and changing the game so far as agile organizations are concerned. I'm going to describe this as socio-technical agility. There's something called a Skunk Works. I'll explain where this came from and how this comes, how we learned about this a little bit later. But this is agility of a different, highly innovation intensive kind. We can focus on bringing entrepreneurial characteristics into an organization and helping the organization to capture the latent entrepreneurial abilities in a methodology which has been called intrapreneurship. In other words, using entrepreneurial capabilities for the benefit of the organization as a whole. Something called granular agility, which means breaking down into small teams. And those of you who are interested in the fashion of agility, Scrum, which I mentioned earlier, which is a form of granular agility, is proving to be highly effective in certain kinds of industries. And the last one is networked agility, by which I mean forming together configurations of people, of resources and organizations, often on a temporary basis to get things done. So the message is, if we're going to be agile, we will probably want to use one of these types of organizational modalities, maybe more than one type, but a type which is capable of providing the sorts of deliverables, achieving the agility ambition that I mentioned earlier. So let me take you to another level of detail. Top-down agility, the image on the right-hand side, I developed these logos just for explanation, shows that it's all about, if you like, the persuasive and dominant power of the bosses. It enables big objectives to be achieved quickly despite difficulties. So if you're in the government, for example, and somebody comes along and says, well, this new virus has arrived, and if we do nothing, then we could find maybe 5% of the population will be killed by it, then the situation needs to be grasped and dominated, and the actions required need to be developed and pushed through as total priorities. So it's leadership intensive, it's authoritarian, it integrates efforts, and even though it's unfashionable, it is a modality which, if you take, for example, in Apple, was the way in which they gained dominance for a long time of the iPhone concept of smartphones. So it is unfashionable, but there are situations in which it really works. And from that point of view, it needs to be on our agenda. The second one is routines-based agility. And you think to yourself, well, how is routines associated with an agile organization? Well, let's assume that you're a fire chief and you have to respond quickly if there's a fire in a large building. What do you need? You need not just to invent your way of coordinating activities when the fire starts, you actually need to prepare for it and to be able to deliver it. A&E departments in hospitals are very good at doing this kind of thing. So you can predict possible configurations where flexibility and adaptiveness is required, develop the routines, practice them, and this enables people to play their part. They kind of take the book off the shelf, as it were, and it enables them to be flexible and capable and to practice scenarios in advance so they're more likely to be effectively agile.
Dave, could I just briefly interject? We've had one request. Is it possible to provide a few more examples that are very SME focused as you go along?
SME focused? Yes, yeah. I will. Yes, of course. Yes. So let's take what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a particular kind of organization, and I'm just going to pick, for example, a bakery cafe which has opened up quite close to me, and I'll use this as my example of SMEs. Now, let's take this cafe. It may be that they would be required to cater for a wedding or a business function or something like this relatively quickly. So what they could do is they could develop a scenario, or, you know, the Grand Hotel in Brighton wants this kind of catering arrangement to be provided for them, and then to work out who's going to do what in order to be able to deliver it. So developing scenarios of possible opportunities is one way in which a small firm can deliver agility. Project-based agility is where you kind of extract from the business as usual a team of people or a larger organization with a task which is to do something which is new but not totally innovative. So I'll come on to the example at the end. If you have a large, complex or demanding opportunity, or there's a major threat, then you'll often need to set up a quasi-independent organization, a temporary organization to achieve it. It enables major new tasks to be completed efficiently and effectively, and it provides the resources and momentum to get things done. So let's go back to our bakery cafe. Let's say that they decide that they haven't done it yet, but they decide that what they want to do is to provide an internet shop so that people can order their wedding cakes and that kind of thing online rather than having it done by people coming into the shop, which is the way that it works at the moment. So they can set up a project, maybe with some outside people. They can configure an organization to actually get this done. The project has goals, aims. It needs to acquire resources which can shift as the project proceeds, but having a specific project gives you that kind of center of gravity about what needs to be done, the capabilities and the momentum. It's the sort of thing that if you just allow it to be part of business as usual, will probably not get done at all. The socio-technical side I mentioned earlier, actually increasingly technology is facilitating agility, and as I mentioned earlier, it's changing the game so far as agile organizations are concerned. I'm going to go back to a military example. What happened in the area of military agility in the early part of this century was military strategists realized that for the first time, soldiers and platoon commanders and people like this could get real-time information, which previously only the people in headquarters had. So they had the capacity to actually be more intelligent rather than just following orders. And this is an example of how technical development doesn't only change how agility is delivered, it actually changes the configurations or the types of agility that can be delivered. So it's a function of the interaction between humans and technical systems. I'll come on to an example at the end. It enables resources to be combined in a new and productive way. And it helps to future-proof organizations, since every predictability that is relatively solid about the future of organizations is that we're going to have a lot more machine intelligence involved. So what about our bakery shop? Well, one of the things that we're finding is that the Internet of Things provides a much greater capacity to predict what's going to go wrong with machines and processes, and actually to prevent these anomalies or breakdowns from happening. And you can imagine that in their ovens, where they're baking their bread, they install sensors, and using the Internet of Things, they're more capable of producing the very finest quality reliably and of fixing machines when they go wrong. So this gives them greater adaptivity and enables them to actually maintain a higher quality of responsive products, changing from one type of product to another according to, for example, the weather. Skunk Works, the term goes back to wartime America, where a Skunk Works was a team of people set up to actually be able to undertake different innovation. It actually comes from Lockheed, and they developed the first American jet fighter during the Second World War. But this modality for being agile enables you not just to work within the current parameters of how you're working at the moment, but to have a management mechanism for undertaking complex, different innovation. So, to achieve challenging tasks that had never previously been completed, cutting edge stuff, it needs to be extracted from the business as usual. If you look at the graphic, the skunk is just on the edge of the organization. Skunk Works follow different rules and is dedicated to do different innovation. Now, some small and medium-sized companies are actually set up as Skunk Works. They are, a lot of the innovation in relation to applications for using information technology comes from very smaller companies. And I actually think that there is a role for SMEs to actually become Skunk Works for, if you like, more traditional organizations. I think we're seeing this in the reactions to protective equipment for COVID people who work in high COVID environments and so on. Many small companies don't have an ambition to really do different. But if they do, then learning about how Skunk Works work and actually achieving this combination of exceptional talent and really dedicating it, it can make a difference. I worked for a while in the film industry, and I worked for the BBC, and we sometimes use small organizations that did marvelous things, for example, in micro photography of in the natural world. So it is worth thinking about as a modality.
Dave, if I could just interject. So it's now 6 minutes to 1, and we have a couple more questions just to encourage you to tie up the different agility types. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thanks for keeping me on track there. Entrepreneurial agility is where you encourage potential entrepreneurs to be strong and to promote their ideas and their energy and their commitment within the scope of an organization. Virgin actually are extremely strong. I know they're not an SME now, but they started off as one on entrepreneurial agility. So it liberates entrepreneurial talents, it energizes many initiatives that wouldn't otherwise be undertaken, it increases the capacity for an organization to be agile, and it's increasingly facilitated by technology. And what you're looking for there is getting a lot of input from people who have ideas and that capacity, and supporting them and helping to grow an organization that is just not managed from the top and directed from the top, but actually, as it were, licenses people to run with their own ideas and resources that. Granular, I've already mentioned with the Skunk Works, so I'm going to rush through this. As I said earlier, if you're interested in granular agility, where you have teams which deliver locally and highly customized solutions, then this is the way to go. Work groups need to become more self-management, and they can have a degree of independence so that they can really get on with achieving things. And the granularity delivers a great deal of agile deliverables. There's a large bank in Denmark that set up 300 agile teams to actually increase its productivity in both internal and external solutions. And networks agility is, as I said earlier, where you're configuring the talents of people within and outside of the organization in new ways to get things done. It's at its best when multiple organizations are combined. If, for example, you're making a film, you will be combining in a network editing facilities, lighting, drivers, catering, and all this kind of thing. And there are specialist managerial methodologies which increase the productivity of networks configurations. That modality can be very important. And these networks can be very flexible and short-term and configured according to need. Say, for example, our small catering company has the opportunity to do things at Glyndebourne, you know, supply the catering for picnics and all that sort of thing. You can imagine that they would do networks with networking with suppliers of wines and champagne, and hiring butlers to provide your picnic between the first and second parts of the opera and all this kind of thing. So you could set up a network just to do a special event at Glyndebourne. And I'm going to just take some questions, and then if I may, I'll just spend 1 minute wrapping up at the end, Shona.
Thanks, Dave. So I think with a view to time, what I'm going to suggest is that I'm going to put one final question to you, and then any questions that we haven't answered, we'll do a written answer to those questions and provide those along with the slides to everybody, because I'm conscious people may well have other meetings to go on to afterwards. So the question that I'm going to put to you is, the bookshelf in the background suggests that you've read quite a lot of books. Are there books that you would recommend young aspiring entrepreneurs to read, and what self-help books would you recommend reading?
Well, Shona, as it happens, you've provided a nice lead-in to my last slide. If anyone's interested in agility and exploring it further, I have written a book about this. Unfortunately, it's actually being typeset now, and it won't be available for a couple of months or so. But what I've been talking about, I've covered in a lot more depth in Exploiting Agility for Advantage. And there are a great number of books. It's one of the areas of management which is a very hot topic. But if you're interested in following up, then as far as books are concerned, there is great value. But I would recommend 2 other sources as well. I will suggest a short reading list in the notes shown, which people might find of value. But all of the major consultancies, McKinsey and P&A and so on, they are selling consultancy services now in relation to agility. I think that Centrium has something new and different to say, and hopefully we can add to that. But if you're interested in agility, then go onto the major consulting sites and download their white papers, because they tend to be very up to date and they tend to be managerially practical. But the other thing is there are excellent videos available on YouTube and other places. So you won't be short of guidance. But what we need is not just to appreciate the importance of agility. What we need to do is to learn how to manage it and integrate the management practices within our organizations. But as I said right at the beginning, a lot of it is already there. Sainsburys were highly agile. Look at wartime Britain and other countries, highly agile. Agility is something which goes back in history, and we used to be better at it than we are now. But we can learn from history, and it's exciting, it's energizing, it's great to be in an agile enterprise. And I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to share some of our work with you.
Dave, thank you very much. If I could just reiterate that there were a couple of questions there at the end that we haven't got onto, but rather than run over any more than we already have done as people begin to drop off, we'll leave it there and have a written response. So Dave, if you could just unshare your screen, we have just a final slide with contact details and things on, which might be useful for you. Again, it will be in the presentation. So I'd just like to finish up by thanking Dave, by thanking all the participants who've come up with some really smashing questions, but also to thank you, to thank our business network partners, Costa Capital and Business East Sussex, for helping to promote the webinars and to inform the content of the webinars, so that we could reach the audience that we have reached. Contact details there on the left show the Brighton website for SMEs, which shows the various ways that you can be in contact with us and the services that we can provide, and also got an email address. Very, very happy to hear from you at any stage on any topic. And certainly if you have requests for other webinars, that's something that we can deal with in hopefully quite an agile sense. So very many thanks again. You will hear from us in the next few days with the presentation and the answers to the final questions. Thank you very much again.